flaws in BMC which can give complete control to the attackers over the servers.
Hey Ganesh, I hear you have a story about USBAnywhere.
Yes, Chris. There's a story about basically research recently done by Eclipsium researchers around, I think, a little after Labor Day. The USBAnywhere basically some sort of vulnerabilities in the BMC part of the actually microservers, the way they're being authenticated, how the transmission has been done. There are about 4 vulnerabilities they've talked about, and they collectively they're calling it USBAnywhere. Specifically, these vulnerabilities are Supermicro X9 to X11 versions. And the way they are doing it is actually the way authentication has been done in plain text most of the time. Sometimes they are using encryption, but even though they are using the encryption, it's very weak. They could be able to basically figure out the encryption algorithm very quickly. These all actually can give lots of access to the remote attacker, the various ways to leverage the access to BMC servers. That's the reason they're calling it USBAnywhere. USBAnywhere in the sense, actually, the way virtual media being interacted when using with the BMC softwares. Before going that, I want to talk a little bit about they have a very great infographic which is explaining how this USBAnywhere part being leveraged with respect to a specific TCP port. In the raw USB, basically, there will be a host server. On top of that, there will be BMC, which is basically provides access by means of a Java applet, which basically runs on, I think, port 623 TCP. That's where actually they're most of the time talking about the vulnerabilities very easily can be exploitable. I would talk about some graphs from our common backbone internet, how we are seeing the activity on this specific port, and how we can correlate with USBAnywhere. Okay. This is the graph. I think sometime last week we were looking at, looking back like last 90 days of graph, looking at the scanning of the flows happening on this specific port. As you can see, there are some spikes happening at regular intervals, like maybe at least around 5 to 6 days, there was a big spike, then coming down. But at the time of they publish, there's not much activity compared to the last 60 days or so. That's the basic of this graph, but I will take it to the another graph and basically explains how many unique scan sources are being actively probing on this specific port. This is also I'm actually showing at the past 90 days. As you can see, since I think third week of May or something, there are sort of big spikes happening. And this trend seems to be continuing every 6 to 7 days. If you can see from that time onwards, you see a big spike happening every 6th or 7th day. The way the graph can be read is on the y-axis, there's the number of unique scanners happening. For example, let's say if I pick up third week of May, we have about 120, close to 120 scanners happening at the time. And they kind of tapers down, again, they comes down. At the average, there are about 10 to 12 scanners at any time seen on this port. What we can tell from our internet data, basically this is not a large volume port. I mean, we know we compare it to any HTTPS ports or 22s, it's very low volume port. But the uniqueness here is that the big spikes we are seeing every time, there seems to be something different there. Let's see if we can find out anything. These are the scanners. I mean, based on some of the reports we get, these are the scanners, how the geographical IP distribution of the scanners with respect to the distribution. Basically, in this graph, even though we are only seeing 4 dots here, the dot in yellow is basically represents the large number of scanners. In this case, actually, I think that corresponds to almost 102 source IPs belonging to a US-based, a prominent US-based cloud provider. And the next graphic I'll show you after taking out those US-based cloud provider IPs, how the graph looks like. If you see, basically, The scanners are there, but the big yellow dot is not there. This gives a good indication that I think a bulk of the activities happening in the previous case is coming from those cloud providers. For example, if I go here, the big spikes happening every 7th day where the IPs are about 100 plus, they belong to the prominent cloud provider in this case. And I picked a couple of IPs. Basically from here, there are about 4 to 5 IPs. I checked those IPs in the showdown, and one of the, basically all of them comes up to some sort of scanners. They're not only scanning on this port 623, also they're also scanning other ports like SSH, even 23 Telnet, ATE 443. But I just want to show that there are known scanners which are also doing the bulk of the scanners also. Then I kind of pivoted on to using the binary edge scanners, which Eclipsium used to find out these devices, how many devices are there. When I did the query, I kind of got the same results as them. Basically, in this case, actually, they can actually break down by the TCP port how many are there. As you can see here, there are about 55,000 IPs which are vulnerable to this USB-Anywhere. But a little caveat here, even though those ports are open, but not necessarily all of them might be vulnerable, they may not be vulnerable, but these devices are open, maybe they can be leveraged for further exploits. What are the quick facts here? I mean, there are hundreds of IPs from US-based cloud IPs. Some of them seems to have a malicious IP associated with. There are some spikes happen, like not the 100 plus IPs happening. The other scanners, the other spikes belongs to some sort of scanners, as we discussed. Some of them seems to be from Senses. Some others seems to be other scanners out there. They're doing scanning on this one. Typically, I think what would be the takeaways? Definitely, it's an interesting attack vector, because most of the time, I mean, if somebody gets access to the BMC, they kind of got the, I think, privileged access, because most of the times organizations try to tend their energies and actually hardening an OS, maybe app-related one. Probably not many are paying attention to actually patching up the firmwares. I think if somebody has BMC and if they're not able to actually update to the latest updates from Supermicro, a quick fix would be disabling the port 623, which kind of thwarts this threat related to USB-Anywhere. I think, yeah, that's all I want to talk about relating to USB-Anywhere.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Ganesh. So do you think you're seeing any successful exploitation in the wild? I know there are those scans going on, but are people using this?
I mean, there are definitely scanners we have seen, but not much as we expected. I think there are only 55,000 IPs at this point, but not all of them are actually vulnerable. But from the microdata, actually, they're providing the actual updates, and they advise the vendors to basically check back with them permanently to basically fix it. And in the past, I know typically they're very quick to identify any fixes. You know, they're providing fixes. They're very good. I think one quick fix is disabling the port 623 TCP, which kind of limits, and also I think defense in depth. In this case, you know, if you have BMC, maybe provide, you know, close attention to the logs, which people are using, what kind of IP addresses are accessing, maybe looking at the data, maybe provide a little bit close. But definitely it's not prevalent as we thought, but definitely it's an interesting attack vector to be paying attention to.
Really interesting. I know you're going to be talking about some of the DVR scanning later on with the weather report, so it'd be nice to see if you see some overlaps in the people trying to hit the USB-Anywhere stuff and some of the DVR attacks as well.
Yeah, they're very prevalent, yeah. The best protection would be if they're not up to date with the patches yet, they can disable the port 623 TCP, which is being used for basically accessing to these USB devices.